Hi, I'm Karen Molines, Division Chief for Calvert County Natural Resources and a board member of the Maryland Native Plant Society. My goal is to educate the public about native plants and their habitats. This video is a presentation I did at the Leonardtown Library in Leonardtown, Maryland on April 13th, 2024. I discuss native trees and their role in your landscape, in your home gardens, and the ecological importance of trees. So please sit back and enjoy native trees for the landscape. Thank you. What I'm going to focus on is a little bit of native trees for the landscape, talk about, and I put a lot of caveats in my talks, and I'm always told, don't tell people things like that, that I am not a gardener, okay? So if you've got garden questions, I am not the person to ask. I learned all my plant identification in natural habitats, in native ecosystems in Maryland, so that's where my focus is. So when I do think about gardening, I do come from it from an ecological perspective. So my talk will kind of try and tie in the values of ecology and what we can make a difference in our own backyard. So, okay. So I have a bunch of reading I'll be doing today. The first thing I'm going to go over is why plant trees. Okay. So why do we plant trees? Anybody know why we plant trees?
Shade.
Shade.
For the birds.
Birds. Any other reasons you plant a tree?
Soil conservation.
Okay. Soil conservation. Oxygen. Fruit, food. Yep. Food. Memories. Right? Maybe you have a memory. There's lots of different reasons. So, you know, I think we've kind of got here. The last one is planting trees is easy. It's really easy to plant a tree. It's easy to plant it wrong as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But there's a lot of great reasons, and none of them is any better than the other. But I always say, it's like most things. If you can click off more than one reason, doesn't it make it a little bit better than if you just chose a single purpose? So if you can try and hit as many of those reasons as possible, it's great. So, why does it matter that we plant trees? And this matters because when you look at the food webs of ecology, plants are the fundamental base of all of our terrestrial ecosystems. We need plants in order to convert the energy from the sun into energy that other organisms can use, and that the plants provide food for the insects, which provides food for other animals, and then all the way up to the apex predator. So plants are really fundamental. If you don't have a vibrant plant community, you are not going to have a vibrant animal community. So if you care about animals, you have to care about plants. It's just, there's no getting around that. So your yard is an extremely important role in our ecosystem, and part of it is because we have so many yards, okay? So I'm going to go over, so your yard can come in lots of different forms. It can be like this, the picture on the left, which is just, you know, you got your driveway, you got your grass, and maybe you've got some fallow areas. It could be a little bit smaller and more, landscaped. And this is where you get confused. When I get confused, I talk about landscapes and landscapes, okay? Because landscapes in a human environment is the way you modify and arrange and cultivate the land around you. Ecologically, landscape is the broad matrix of plants, water, soil, animals. It's the whole broad thing. So sometimes you have to use that word context. So when I use landscape, you have to kind of think about my context. And then I just put my lovely little dogwood there because, you know, you can then say within your landscape, your yard, you would have your trees and shrubs and other native species. So So when you are thinking about your landscape, a lot of people, this is one of the first things they want to do. They want to garden for wildlife, you know. So there's lots of ways to garden for wildlife. The big push these days is the pollinators. If you had talked to me 10 years ago, it would have been bird-friendly yards. Now it's pollinators. And some of that's related, goes back to that food chain. Because, and I think I'll talk about it in a few more slides, that you can't have birds without insects, and you can't have insects without your plants. And so that'll be a theme that you hear throughout my talk. So when you think about your yard, and you come up with like, why do I want to do what I want in my yard? It's, you know, gardening for wildlife is one of it, and trees are a really important way of providing this context for wildlife. And how many of you have read Doug Ptolemy's books? Yeah. I don't have his what it's called, Bringing Nature Home, but I do have The Nature of Oaks. For a tree perspective, this book is really an amazing book to read. It's really a great book. And I'll be talking about oaks as we go through. But as you can see, his quote is, in the past we've asked one thing of our gardens, that they are pretty. Right? And I'll let you know, with being with the Native Plant Society, we started in '91. That's when I started. It's been so amazing to see how the concept of a garden has evolved over those years, where people wanted, you know, we wanted to look nice. We want a flower that blooms pretty. But now we're asking them to do all those other things that I showed in that slide. You know, we want them to support life. So we want that wildlife garden. We want them to sequester carbon so we can affect climate change issues, our pollinators, and then also manage water so that we can reduce our stormwater runoff. So we're asking a lot of our gardens, so we have to think beyond is this plant a pretty plant? Does the garden look nice and neat? Because we're asking it to do a lot more. Here's my thing, the sense of place. So this is a map of Calvert County. You know, and I just have this because this was the map I had most convenient. So when you think about your yard, think about where you are within the big landscape, where your landscape falls in the big landscape. And so when you go and zoom into your area, and I'm sorry that it seems really hard to see this, but one of the things that is in here is you've got a lot of forests. Of course, we have the Bay and the Patuxent River and the Potomac River as waterways with all the streams and creeks that you put a drop of water down on the ground, that water goes into a creek somewhere. You might not think you live near a creek, but you do, and then that creek flows into our bigger areas, and you have a creek in your backyard, so you know it flows right to the creek. And then you've got all the developed areas. So there's this matrix, it's called in the landscape ecology world, a matrix of different puzzle pieces that fit together to make the big broad landscape. And so the question is, where does your yard fall in that matrix? And can you be that missing piece if you're in a highly developed area? Can your yard be that piece that connects natural area to natural area, so that you help create this corridor of wild and natural areas for the wildlife? So that's my perspective of gardening, is I want to be that connection. So making sure that what I have happening in my yard, because I do gardening. Carrie knows how many plants have I bought from you. I've been buying native plants from nurseries since, you know, the 90s, and I still have some of them. They have moved through 3 moves with me, and I still have them with me. And I do try and replicate the ecosystems around me. So I think, Carrie, maybe I was talking to you, maybe not. When I purchased some of your plants, I was like, you had like a goldenrod. And I'm like, that's a beautiful goldenrod. You should have it in gardens. But my garden, that goldenrod doesn't grow in the area where I live. So I am not going to plant that in my yard, because I want my plants to represent the natural ecosystem that would have occurred there if my house wasn't there. So it's just thinking about that sense of place. Where does your yard belong? And making choices on your plants. And so you know, the plants you put in your yard do make a difference, okay? And I'm gonna go in a little bit into my little invasive species spiel, that imagine that all you had in your yard were the cement structures. Aren't they cute though? They're really cute. I'd love to have those. Look how fun and whimsical. Or maybe they're really just attractive and aesthetically pleasing, and you know, that's awesome. But what if that's all your yard was? What would wildlife say if all they saw were concrete structures? Yeah, not a whole lot. Where all they had were these attractive, you know, really cool garden globes. Not much there. What are they going to eat? Where are they going to have their babies? Where are they going to hide from the weather? There's not a lot there. And when you think about invasive species and non-native plants, they are like sculptures in your garden. Okay. Is it wrong to have a sculpture in your garden? No, you can have a bird bath, or you can have a, you know, I have a St. Francis of Assisi statue, you know. I have a garden bench. Those things aren't harmful to have. So if you have a non-native plant, it's not bad. It's just that you can't have your whole yard be non-native, because then it's like being the statuary. And our non-natives could be an invasive species. And an invasive species is a non-native species that disrupts native ecosystems. So they might disrupt other plants, you know, take up the space of another plant, like a Bradford pear. You have a Bradford pear there, guess what? The dogwood can't grow there. So it's taking up physical space of a native species. It may be harmful to pollinators. Garlic mustard, it's not a tree, it's an herbaceous plant. There's a butterfly called the West Virginia white that lays its eggs on mustard plants. How many of you have seen the cabbage whites flying around here? Cabbage whites are in the same group of butterflies, and they also feed on cabbage and any other mustard plant. So if you have kale, mustards, broccoli, things like that, it will feed off of those. Well, the West Virginia white feeds on mustards, and when it lays its egg on the host plant, and we'll talk a little bit about host plants in a little bit, the caterpillar then starts eating the leaves. If that West Virginia white lays its egg on a garlic mustard, the caterpillar dies. Yes. So garlic mustard, even though it seems good to the adults, the caterpillars cannot survive on it. And so now that butterfly is on the rare, threatened, endangered species list because garlic mustard is so invasive. So it could be that invasive plants impact the wildlife. They can disrupt waterways. They can do, you know, the tamarisk that's out west in the dry stream beds that makes them even drier. So there's a lot of impact. So in choosing your plants for your yard, never ever plant invasive species. There is state law that does restrict what species, but it doesn't cover nearly as many. This little small book, it was reprinted, so there's a different version of this. This goes over, you know, about 100 different non-native species that are invasive. So the law does not
In fact,
cover
they're
them.
sold at the nurseries.
Yes,
You
yeah.
can see the barberry and
Yeah.
the English ivy and the vinca.
Yeah, there's a lot. And some of that's because there's still a component of what does a garden look like? And it's that very traditional European, Eurocentric vision that we are slowly, and I said, I've been dealing with native plants since the 90s. It is coming around, but it's still amazing how one of the things that each of us can do is educate people who you think might not know a lot about natives and get them to, you know, turn around a little bit. And it is amazing. So, and if you really did want to talk on non-natives, I could certainly do a full talk on non-natives for you if you wanted to. And so when you do choose a plant to make a difference, whether it's planting a bald cypress so that you can have this awesome little caterpillar of a moth that only feeds on bald cypress. It's pretty cool. Or this was my yard in North Beach where I had I had a maple tree, and I had, in fact, you'll see a slide later on with the same picture where it shows the plant list I had in North Beach, where, you know, the plants do make a difference. These are all native species here. There's probably 20 different native species there. So, and that's one of the big things when you look at traditional gardening versus native plant garden, that English ivy works because people want one plant to do one, be a complete ground cover. Those kinds of species do not exist in native ecosystem. A diversity of ground covers what's worked. So when I put in this garden, the goal was to come up with a year-round ground cover garden. And what I had to do was, this is your wild blue phlox, there's some wild ginger, there's some ferns back there, there was some of the, all kinds of stuff. The shrub, there was a viburnum shrub, that's our little, the cherry, I think that was the cherry leaf viburnum there. So, you have, there was May apples, there was all kinds of stuff. So I had a whole bunch to sort of take place of the English ivy that was growing there when we moved into the house. So, and it worked. It stayed pretty much green until like really dead of winter. So, and so one of the things that's been coming on, this is Doug Talmy has really been pushing this, the keystone species. How many of you have heard about keystone species when it comes to gardens or even wildlife or ecology? Okay, keystone species is an old ecological concept. I learned that when I was in college in the 80s, ecological keystone species. It's now coming around from into a more garden landscape perspective. And what a keystone means is when you have an arch, this piece right there that's like speckled, that is called the keystone because that holds the arch stable. And so for a keystone species, you have to think about that species holds together the whole picture. And if you removed that keystone, that arch would collapse and could be unstable. So the keystone species are those species that kind of hold everything together. And so I'm going to just go over a little bit about keystone species. When we talk about keystone plants, and trees in particular, is there are two types of keystone species. One of them are the host plants for caterpillars. I've talked a little bit about that, but I'll go into a little bit more detail. And then the plants that are pollen, that provide pollen for the specialist bees. I'm not going to talk about too much about the pollen in the bees because that tends to be the herbaceous plants, but again, if you want to talk about that, I can give you a talk about that one day. But the specialist bees, one of the things people don't realize is that of all of the bees that we have in Maryland, we have 400 species of bees, they all have to feed their young pollen. Okay? Well, I wouldn't say all. There's probably one or two species, because there's always that exception in the world. So when you think about bees, you might think of honeybees. Guess what? Honeybees feed their babies pollen. The honey that they make is for the adults to eat more than the larvae to eat. But we're not talking about honeybees. We're talking about all the other 400 species that are here in Maryland. That if they don't have the right pollen, they won't have successful young. And so there's, some bees can feed on anything. I bet you've seen the bees in your garden. Oh, they're on a dandelion today, and then they're on their, your black-eyed Susans, and now they're on a different plant. They don't care. They can pretty much eat any pollen, but the ones that have to have the very special pollen, they are the ones that we focus on with keystones. So, and for the host plant for caterpillars, the trees are an amazing, important factor for caterpillars. It's something that, you might not think about, because everybody knows about the monarch butterfly, right? Everybody knows about the monarch. They eat milkweed. Is milkweed a tree? No. You might think of the the black swallowtail. It feeds on your parsley plants and your carrot plants. that's not a tree. But I did a brochure for the Native Plant Society on butterfly gardening. So, hey, here's another talk you can have, you do. And what I was amazed of the 30 or so species I was looking at as common butterflies of, Maryland, almost all of them required trees for their larvae. And I just thought that was like, that is so amazing, because the adults require the flowers that grow in sunny open spots, but the larvae require the trees in the woods. Guess what woods and open areas is in Maryland? That's a very typical landscape feature, the different color pieces. So we're going to go over these trees, and the one caveat, and this comes from Doug Tallamy's work, is that we only go to the genus level. Anybody need me to explain what genus level means? When you're looking, and one day I'll get a slide that shows this, but I haven't gotten around to that. In biology, all organisms are classified into similar groups. And you can start up high at the phylum level, which would be Animalia, the animal phylum, or it could be the plant phylum, it could be the fungus phylum. So I think there are now 8 different phylum in the world. I learned it was 3 way back when. But so that's your phylum. And then you have kingdoms. No, you have kingdoms first, sorry. Kingdoms are the plants and animals. Because I had to do my King Philip came over for a good soup to remember the order. Kingdom is the top, phylum is the next, so that would be in animals that might be, I don't know what my phylums are. And then you have phylum, so king is kingdom, Philip is phylum, cane is class, over is order. You do insects, order is a very typical level that you go to. Then family is 4. Good is genus, soup is species, okay? So a genus and species is usually what we think about when we think about Homo sapiens. What in the world is a Homo sapien? Humans. Homo is the genus, sapiens is the specific epithet, so the species is Homo sapiens. So when we talk about plants, family level is often the level when you talk about plants. It's in the mint family, it's in the oak family, it's in the parsley family. And then the genus is the next level, so you're an oak, a quercus, or you're a maple, you're an acer. So when you're talking about the keystone species, at this point the research has only gone to genus level. But what's really interesting is within that genus, almost everywhere you live, you can find at least one species in that genus. And as long as it's native to that area, it will function as a keystone species. And so I was thinking about, and I'm not a Western species person, but there's a pine, like the ponderosa pine, that it's this beautiful giant tree, and when you climb a ponderosa pine, and you come to one of the tall the branches up high, there's a whole ecosystem up there with salamanders and flowers and all kinds of stuff living up there at that level, but not down at the bottom. So it's a really amazing keystone species when you're out west. If I planted it here, it would be a statue. There would not be an ecosystem with it. But we have pines that do grow in this area, Virginia pine, loblolly pine, pitch pine. So if you want a pine tree, find the one that's native to your area. So wherever you are in the U.S., there's a native pine that you can plant in your yard. So it's really important to take this with that, looking at the genera, which is plural of genus, but looking for the species that are native to your area. And here I have a picture of the river birch, which is a really awesome native tree. And I don't have the plants memorized that are in this garden here, but I bet you there's a river birch there. These are great. But 284 species of caterpillars have been found to feed on the genus for birches, the Betula. 284 different species. Think about that diversity.
Are you going to tell us about Birds and how many caterpillars?
Yes, we'll get that, yeah. And so the insects, so why do we care about the caterpillars? One thing is we care about the caterpillars because that's what the studies were done on. So there might be other things out there that are just as critical from an insect perspective, but it seems like from the studies that caterpillars are the amazing insect diversity on these trees. So insects are really important because they're the critical link in the food chain, which we'll talk about, but they also maintain the plant diversity because insects are the primary pollinators of our species. Here, it's, again, Doug Callamy's work, or his grad students he's worked with. 80% of our plants are pollinated by animals. And what pollination does is it takes a genetic representation of a species and transfers that genetic diversity to another of the same species, and it intermingles all those genes. And so you have, so I don't think I even talked about diversity here. That would be a whole other talk. But when you think about diversity, you think about lots of different things. So in ecology, the diversity is how many different kinds of species are there. Do you have 5 different species of trees and 20 different species of herbaceous plants and 50 different species of insects versus one, English ivy, Nandina to nothing to whatever would eat its berry. But there's also diversity in genetics. And look around this room and tell me what kind of diversity you see in our genetics. Okay? You've got hair color, skin color, eye color, height, weight, all kinds of diversity within the genetic. And so the insects maintain that diversity of genetics within a population. And that way, if something happens in the ecosystem, more than likely there's a genetic type that can tolerate some sort of, change in the environment. So it's really, really important. And so as we talk about the caterpillars, that what was found was what was interesting. There was of all the plant genera that were out there, and I can't remember if it was just tree genera. I'd have to reread that study. But only 14% of those genera were the primary genera that supported 90% of the caterpillar species. So it's also one of those things where, like, I always get the question, well, is there a book to help identify the plants that are out there, And so I can show them the book that's out there. This is the Flora of Virginia. And if you want this, I don't have my cover anymore of this, but for my last talk, you have a pretty good picture of this. The Flora of Virginia is almost identical to the Flora of Maryland. There's a lot of plants here, aren't there? So if you can say, well, how can I break that down to fewer? Well, some people have done that to this one, and then Plant Society did this one. So the same thing with the keystone species. We've been able to isolate sort of the top tier plants that if you had to choose one plant to put in your garden, make it one of these, 14%. And so here we have the Luna moth. How many of you have seen that? In June, you usually see it dead because the adult only lives literally one day. It lives very short life. It doesn't have feeding mouth parts, so it can't eat. It's just there to reproduce and the female to lay eggs. So you say, if the adult can't eat, how does it get any energy? It's because the caterpillars are what's providing the energy for the adult butterflies. And the adult butterflies are what we love, right? That's what we love seeing in the garden. People see a caterpillar and they're like a little squeamish, and but the caterpillars are important. And the Luna moth feeds off of black cherry and a few other species. And the black cherry, 340 species of caterpillars feed on Prunus, the genus Prunus. So in Maryland, we do have a couple genera of Prunus. The black cherry Prunus Seratina, however you like pronouncing it. That is a very dominant tree. And I'll tell you, if you have a tiny little woodlot in your yard, you probably have black cherry in your little woodlot. It's a very common species. Birds love the fruit. The caterpillars, several different common butterflies that you might know, the spicebush swallowtail feeds off of this, but 340 species. So we also have Virginia cherry is another native cherry. But the black cherry is a great little tree. It's a beautiful tree. And so here, just to refresh, since I've been talking about caterpillars, that, as I mentioned, we love seeing our butterflies. How many of you have seen your first tiger swallowtail? Yeah, so what's really cool is, this is a circle, so you can start anywhere in the circle. The tiger swallowtail overwinters in the pupal stage. And so that's this lower one. The pupa, and once it gets warm enough, the adult will hatch out of that and start flying around to reproduce, okay? And when the female is fertilized, and she has to go find the right plant for her egg to lay on. Remember I talked about the West Virginia white a little bit, mentioned the monarchs. Tiger swallowtail, same thing. They're not as, they have a wide range of trees they can put on. They can, sassafras, I think black cherry. But tulip tree is the one I always think about. Is this very dominant tree of our forest. It's really beautiful, and so she will lay her eggs on the twigs of the tulip tree, and then as the leaves start to emerge, that's what the caterpillar will start feeding on. And so you get these fun little caterpillars that it's this funny little brown one, but they also come in a greenish color. So they're really fun with the eye spots. So there's two big giant eyes. They can see a lot, right? Well, little caterpillar, the eyes are actually down here. Those are fake eye spots, so it looks more scary to the predators. So, and then they have this is what they look like when, at the very bottom left is what they look like when they first emerge. They look like a little bird dropping. So some really interesting camouflage going on. And then they eventually get big enough that they pupate over winter, and then they come out in the spring. There sometimes are two broods in a year, so you might see a late emergence of tiger swallowtails in the fall.
Well, and also, if the pupas overwinter, are they overwintering kind of in the leaf litter and in the?
They attach themselves to some structure. So it could be a twig or a branch. So, and that's the leave the leaves concept. Leave the leaves, because a lot of these overwintering, depending on what species you're talking about, some overwinter as an adult. The morning cloak butterflies and the question mark and the comma butterfly overwinter as adults. Okay. Some overwinter as an egg. That they're just sitting there, and the I think the zebra swallowtail is also a pupa. I can't think off the top of my head. Then you have others that overwinter as a larva, the woolly bear caterpillar. Right? You've seen that one? That one overwinters as a larva. So depending on species, it depends on what phase it will overwinter on. And so a lot of the eggs, larvae, and the pupa could be in your leaf litter. That's where I was going with it. That's why they leave the leaves. Okay. And as mentioned, the insects are the foundation of the food web. So we're back to our black cherry, and you've got the caterpillars feeding on it, and then you have the chickadees who are feeding on caterpillars. As I mentioned, bees feed their young pollen. Almost every bird feeds its young some other animal. And for the small songbirds, that means it's an insect. Okay? And of course then the small birds feed the bigger birds like the hawks and the owls and things. So what was really amazing is, again, another Doug Tallamy data point, where there was a graduate student who was monitoring chickadee nests. There was also somebody monitoring another species. It's in my notes somewhere. But what they did is they literally sat there and they counted how many caterpillars the chickadee was bringing to its nest. Okay? Welcome to science. What they found is that in order to have one successful brood of the nest, the chickadee had to bring between 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, okay, to feed, to have a successful nest. So think about how many chickadees you might see in the woods. And so if you find a little flock of a dozen chickadees, that's at minimum 6 pairs of chickadees, each needing 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. Those caterpillars need the trees. Okay, so if you want the majestic hawks, then you want the chickadees, and then you want the caterpillars. So you need the native trees. So for a hawk who can eat, I tried to do the math, and it's probably somewhere, but the hawk eats about 10% of its body weight every day. And so when you think about a hawk that weighs 20 grams, the chickadee weighs about 0.5 gram. A hawk has to eat a lot of chickadees. And that means that there's got to be a lot of caterpillars out there. And again, by planting a black cherry or making sure black cherry survives in your woods, you are helping to make sure that there's enough food for these animals. So trees for your yard, because that's kind of where this talk requests originally came from, but I can't ever just get there. But as everybody's heard, is that right place, right tree, right place. That's a standard, the utility companies want you to put the right tree in. And what that means is you want to check what size it's going to be. Is it going to fit in the space that you have? Do you have electric lines overhead? You don't want to put a tall tree up next to an electric line. So you want to think about the size. What kind of soil do you have? That's one thing they always request is, take your soil, do a soil test. Now, I'll let you know, I literally have never done a soil test in any of my yards that I've done, because I feel like I'm trying to do the native plants, and I think that the ones I choose will probably do okay in the soils I have. If you're in a brand new built house, likely you have no topsoil, so you might need to think about testing. I've only lived in older houses that the soil's not very new. So you do want to test to make sure of that. And then what kind of light requirement there is. So is it a tree that needs full sun? Can it survive in the shady area? So thinking about that. But also thinking about how it might shade the areas of your house that you value. Is it going to help shade your deck, or is it going to help shade on the southern side of your house so that it helps cool and maintain, you don't have to spend as much electricity on cooling your house down. Also aesthetics. We do want things to look nice, and so some of it is also shifting what aesthetics mean. Okay? Because 20 years ago, the aesthetic was that beautiful alley of white flowering trees in the spring. Oh, it was just so beautiful, wasn't it? Now, that Bradford pear is now the white alley down every single roadway and into the woods, and it's a mess. So the question is that the aesthetic that, can we shift of what is an attractive aesthetic? One of my favorite aesthetics is mature holly trees going down that same road, or alternating the junipers with something like a dogwoods and redbuds, or the maple trees or red maple. So rethinking the aesthetic, and so kind of questioning yourself of, oh wait, why do I think that's beautiful? Is there something more natural? And long ago I did a talk on winter beauty in native gardens, because everybody wants things that they want that winter garden to look attractive. And so people only think about evergreen trees. But there is beauty in form and structure of trees, shrubs, and the weeds in your garden, all your seed heads. So, rethinking what aesthetic means. But I'm not going to say you shouldn't put in your Japanese cherry. That's a certainly beautiful tree to put in there. Just don't have it be the only tree that you have in your yard, because that prunus does not feed native caterpillars. Okay. And then, of course, for wildlife, what kind of wildlife do you want to the tract. So a lot of questions to think about. Fortunately, again, when you focus on the keystone species, it does kind of eliminate, it gives you a smaller choice to have to go through. So you don't have to go through and even, you know, a tree book. So here's one just on trees. So you don't have to worry about which of the 150 species of trees you might need to. It's like, wait, we can give you, you know, a handful, a dozen genera to choose from. And so now we come to Quercus, the oaks. This is the keystone species. If you can only choose one tree for your yard, make it an oak, okay? This one, 557 species of caterpillars. That is a lot. And I think it's in Doug Tallamy's book that explains why oaks and caterpillars are so intertwined, and some of it has to do with the tannins in the leaves and protecting the caterpillar. And what's really amazing is we have 22 species of oaks in Maryland. So no matter where you are, what habitat requirement you have, what size and light, there is a native oak that can fit your place. Can you find that native oak? That's a whole nother question. But, and I will let you know, so I have a whole book just on oaks. This is oaks of Eastern North America. There are a lot of different oaks out there. So you can sort of see we went from this book to, you know, this book of all the trees to now let's just talk about oaks. So oaks are really an important one. So like I said, if you don't need a big tree, there's things like the post oak is a relatively small tree. The which one is Maryland? A blackjack oak is another very small tree. But if you have a dry area, the chestnut oaks can handle drier areas. You have a wet area, we've got swamp white oaks. So there's something there for everybody. And what's really amazing is, you know, sometimes if you just leave, you know, they will come up on their own. Now, deer are another problem. We won't even go into deer. So. And then some of the other species I did mention, the prunus, the maples, the acer, so Acer rubrum, the red maple is our dominant maple, but we do have box elders, silver maples, they all are really good. The hickories also support a lot of caterpillars, and their nuts support wildlife like turkeys and squirrels and deer. And then the pine trees. So if you just want a little evergreen shield, the pine trees do also support a nice selection of caterpillars. So like I said, if you go oaks, you've got these four, you've got the birch. You know, you choose one of those 6 species, you know, a species in one of those 6 genera, you're going to be doing really good for wildlife. And then, even more trees. Oh, and I think I chose these because I think that these are in the garden out here. So the pawpaw. Do you have pawpaw? No, because you don't, because I don't have pawpaw listed there. But that's a picture of a pawpaw.
We do have.
You have a pawpaw? Okay, good. So this is the pawpaw, which the zebra swallowtail. I think did I show you a picture of a zebra swallowtail? Maybe I just mentioned it. The zebra swallowtail only feeds on pawpaws. That is its only host plant. So, and what's really cool is you can see on this one, here's the flowers that they'll start coming out soon before the leaves come out. The leaves are these giant, and I mean giant leaves. And you can see in this fall, you will get, where's my light? There it is. The fruit of pawpaws, which are lovely to eat. I can usually only eat one of them. They're large for one, and they're very rich. They're in the custard apple family. So it is a custard apple. It's the only species in the U.S. of the custard apple. They're all tropical. And so it tells a little bit of history of the United States. that the pawpaw was here, it also shows the history of the Native American influence on our biodiversity, because the thinking goes that these fruits are so large and the seeds so large that they evolved to be dispersed by large mammals. So what is the largest mammal we kind of have in the U.S. besides people? Deer. Okay. These seeds are even larger than what a deer would disseminate. So they think this was when mammoths, woolly mammoths or giant sloths, or the prehistoric animals of the area were around to eat these and spread them. Okay. But the range of those animals didn't really come up into the north where we find these growing. So how did they get up there? What they figured is that the Native Americans who were down south knew that these trees were very nutritious. They're very easy to grow. So it was a trade food. And they traded it with tribes up and down the East Coast. And it has thrived. And it's one of the few plants that really is deer resistant. So as our deer populations are higher, you're finding it's actually expanding even more because it's very deer resistant. So it's a great little tree to have in your yard.
They love shade.
Yes, they like shade. They like to be a little bit wet to get started, but they can grow in drier areas. And so lots of different great trees that you can find in most nurseries. So I did try and choose species that would be relatively easy to find. And so once you've got that keystone species, then you can look at all the things that you might be adding as more attractive. And if I was doing my pollination, you would hear more about the keystone species for pollinators, for the pollen specialist bees. So that's cutleaf toothwort. But so again, here's that picture of my North Beach garden, and this was my map of my garden, not to scale. But my yard was 50 feet by 150 feet. Okay. But these were all the plants I had in my backyard, which was only 50 by 50 because the house took up a third and the front yard took up a third. These are my trees up here. I had Acer rubrum, Quercus albus, I had red maple, white oak, persimmon, red bud, I had winter berry holly, I had amelancher, that's serviceberry, carpinus, that's ironwood, I had spice bush, I had strawberry bush, I had viburnum prunifolium, black haw, I think that's called. I had the wetland dogwood, I had sweet pepper bush, and I had elderberry and cyanthus fringe tree. They were my woody plants, my trees and shrubs in my little 50 by 50 yard. And then everything else are all the herbaceous plants that I had in that yard. So the diversity that's where you get to have fun. It's like, okay, so what was I trying to do? My ground cover, so this list is a lot of what I put in my ground cover area. So I could play with my ground cover. I could play with the butterfly habitat. There's this little spot right, I think it was down here, was where I let the milkweed grow. You put milkweed in, it's like, oh, I love having my milkweed garden, and the next year it's over there. Well, I just moved my milkweed garden to where it wanted to grow. Best thing to do for milkweed. So I had my butterfly garden, we had a little rain trench because it was very flat in North Beach and water pool, so I had a little wetland. So that's where you get to play. You've got your keystone species in, and now you get to play with what are the reasons you are putting your plants in there. And I didn't have kids or pets to run around outside, so I didn't really care about having a lawn. Doesn't mean you can't have a lawn. You can. Just think about how much of a lawn do you really need, So, so like I said, butterfly gardening. So I had a button bush in my front yard and the monarch, so that's where I had the button bush, and that's where one of my butterfly gardens was. If you want to do birds, we grew a lot of red flowers for the hummingbirds, so they loved it. So we had the Monarda, the bee balm, had the columbine, but we also did like scarlet sage. We grow in our vegetable garden scarlet runner beans. They have red flowers that the hummingbirds like. Coral honeysuckle, so all kinds of red plants for the hummingbirds. And we put up hummingbird feeders too. So, sort of ultimately, what you do in your yard is you want the trees for the lepidopteras, the butterflies and moths, caterpillars. You want to connect those habitats, thinking about where you fit, where your puzzle piece fits. The biodiversity, you know, that's critical. As you saw in my little yard, it was a hotspot of biodiversity there, so make sure. And so that way you can actually have a very functioning ecosystem and just have an amazing time when you're out there enjoying the life that's just sprouting, blooming, and buzzing around you. So, how to plant a tree. I figured I'd better put this in there because we're talking about trees. So I mentioned test the soil. Probably about the biggest problem we see. How many of you seen the mulch volcanoes? Yep. So this one shows really nicely how the tree, everything around the tree is at ground level. It doesn't creep up the tree, because some things that people forget is the tree breathes oxygen partially through its leaves, but also through the base of its tree trunk. And when the tree flares out, it's creating more surface area for more oxygen. You pile mulch over there, you're smothering that poor tree. So the other is, look how the area that's been sort of cleared and dug out for the tree is about the same size as the canopy width. So you want to make sure you give it plenty of space so that there's the roots can go out. The tree roots grow more out than deep. So yes, it has to be deep enough to cover the root ball, but you're not going down like 5 or 6 feet. You're only going down maybe 2 feet for a small tree, 3 feet for a larger tree. So you don't have to go down super deep. You want it deep enough so that it's not like sitting on solid clay. So and then the other thing, which I put in here because I got to, call Miss Utility before you dig. So you don't accidentally dig through an electric line or a, cable line. That's very expensive if you do that because they charge you to repair. So call them first. It's a cheap phone call, 811. They come out, they spray paint your yard with where the lines are. They do not do water lines, so make sure you know where your water line is. But usually water lines are much deeper than what you're digging, but you always want to pay attention to that. Okay. And so now, how many of you are ready to try and identify things? I will warn you, we are in the hardest time of year to identify trees. Right, because there are no leaves, so most of the field guides, so like this is the field guide I learned on, require full-grown leaves. So when you first have the little leaves sprouting out, they're not going to key out, you're not going to be able to identify them very well with this book. If we were in the winter, we would use fruits and twigs, but once the leaves start coming out, the twigs change, and you can't use a twig book. So we are kind of in a tough spot. Fortunately, we're going to a garden that,
has ID signs.
yes, they're ID, so you're like, what in the world is it? And these are the 2 books, if you're a beginner, these are the 2 books I would get. They're cheap. I bought this one for $2, but that was from Longwood Gardens a long, long time ago. They're like $6 each. So it's the Tree Finder and the Winter Tree Finder. There's also a Fern Finder, a Flower Finder. There's a lot of great finders, but these 2 are, I find, the best beginner books to start with. And so when we go out, we're going to be seeing if we can kind of at least see how these are. I think I have a dozen copies of each of these books. And I have hand lenses. because I think I mentioned that at least for native plants. So if you have a hand lens, that's great. I do have hand lenses to borrow. If you don't have a hand lens, but you're like a birder, where is it? Here it is. And you've got your binoculars are magnifiers. Because you know, you look at your binoculars and you can see far away. If you flip them upside down, you can see close up. So if you have a pair of binoculars, you have a hand lens. Because they are, most field guides that I recommend, they assume that you can see something through with your naked eye. But some of us know our naked eye is not as good as other people's naked eyes. So it's the naked eye means you can see it with what's called a 10x magnification. So it can magnify things 10 times. So most people, regardless of their vision, if you use a magnifier, oh, I bet y'all have a cell phone. You can use your camera to zoom in and magnify things as well. And then, I'm not going to go into iNaturalist too much today, but if you wanted a whole nother workshop on iNaturalist, I think it's next weekend, Flag Pond, I'm doing an iNaturalist workshop, so.
Do you know Google Lens?
Yeah, so Google, and so that's for, yeah, and Google Lens is, I would rather go with iNaturalist. If you're going to be depending, because then at least iNaturalist will save it as an observation and you can have thousands of other people looking for it.
What about plants and the application of plants?
I don't know, I haven't used that, yeah. Yeah, so you have a lot of camera apps that can help identify things. iNaturalist is much more powerful than identification. It's, like I said, it lets you save your observations so you have not only the identification, other people can help you identify things. You now have your little field trip list of what you've actually seen. So there's a lot of other really great benefits to iNaturalist. So for ID basics, let's see where I'm going with this. So I was like, I have a whole lecture on going through that tree identification with leaves. So again, here's another talk. We wanted me to do tree identification, but let's do that like in summer when the trees are really leafed out. So when you're doing identification, you really are kind of looking much more, you're looking beyond what you can see. So it's, you also think of as being a nature detective. So a couple key features, and I do tell people if you have plants that you need to identify, I'm willing to help you identify. But I will ask you some set questions, and you better have those answers. First, you know, is it a tree or not? So what is a tree? Been talking about trees, never went into that. What is a tree?
It's a woody plant.
Okay. Okay, a plant, it's woody.
Larger than a bush.
Larger than a bush. Oh goodness, and what is a bush? So a tree has one main central stem that then other branches come out. So a shrub or a bush has multiple stems coming out. A tree typically is taller than 20 feet tall, but small trees can be under 20 feet. So a dogwood is a single stem coming up. That's a small tree. An oak is one single stem coming up, but it can be 100 feet tall. So evergreen versus deciduous, what does that mean?
Loses its leaves.
Okay, deciduous, it loses its leaves. Most of our evergreen trees are in the conifer family, but we have a few that are evergreen that aren't, such as, what's an evergreen tree that's not a pine tree? A magnolia, the southern magnolia and the sweet bay magnolia leaf. Holly, the American holly maintains its leaves. Spruce is in the pine group, so it's a conifer. Are all conifers evergreen? Which ones?
Bald cypress is not.
Okay, bald cypress. It's called bald cypress because the cypress is a conifer, but it's bald because it loses its leaves in the winter. The larch is the other one that loses its leaves. That's a Western Maryland species, so we don't worry about that. So, and then opposite versus alternate. So what that means is the branching. When you have a branch and you start the bottom of the branch and you work your way up. You hit a twig, a leaf, another branch. It points off. Is there, to get to the next branch, do you go directly opposite that one, or do you have to go up and often to the other side of the twig to find the next branch, leaf, or twig? So does it alternate locations, or are they opposite each other? And if your tree is opposite, you know, the whole goal of identification is to narrow down your choices. Go from plants to trees, and then if you can get opposite, you have now gone to the mad plants. Because for the most part, if it's a tree, it's an M, an A, or a D. Which is M are the maples, A's are the ashes, and D's are the dogwoods. If you have opposite branching tree, that's more than likely what it is. There are a few others, Paulownia and catalpa, which are not really native trees. There's also a lot of shrubs that are opposite. So, but for the trees, mad. And horse chestnuts, that's another non-native, but it's often found in landscaped areas. So if you have opposite trees, you're like, great, a maple, ash, or dogwood. And I bet you everybody knows what a maple leaf looks like. Right? So for the most part, you're going to see an opposite tree, and then you're going to see a leaf that says, hey, that's a maple leaf. Guess what kind of tree it is? A maple tree, yeah. The dogwoods, does everybody know what a dogwood leaf looks like? It's kind of just like a generic round leaf. Pretty boring, no teeth. The ashes, how about ashes? You know what an ash looks like? It's got compound leaves. And so I'm not going to go into that because you really need to see a leaf to understand the compound. But again, another reason to have me come through for a talk. So when you're out there, you want to be a twig detective. Okay? And so what you want to do is really pay attention to differences and just some twigs. So when you're looking at the twigs, what you're trying to do is you really want to, and I always try and do this when we identify plants, try and find like 6 to 10 things to say about the twig that you're looking at. So I've given you some words to already use. Is it a deciduous or an evergreen tree? So are there still leaves on the tree, on the twig? Is it opposite or alternate? So you can look at these, and how would you describe this first one? The first one on the left. You have a harder time seeing this because it's split. But do you see how even without the without twigs or leaves, can you see the buds? These round things are buds, and these flatter things are the leaf scars. Those leaf scars show you where the leaves were. And you can see that these kind of look like they're going opposite each other, don't they? Same with this one. You can see that the leaf buds are completely opposite. One of the interesting things about buds that people forget, if we go out there and we see the buds today, they actually started forming last spring. So what's really cool is when you are looking at leaves on trees, also look at the buds because they're there. The other thing you can look for are other features. Look at this weird thing on the birch. That weird thing, that's actually one of its flowers, a catkin. Same thing up here with this alder, the catkin's on the top, up here. So so when you're looking, you kind of try and figure out, like, how can you describe this to somebody with, like, 6 to 10 different characteristics, because that's going to help you when you go through the key. So we've been using a lot of terminology. So you've got the twig, and I really apologize. I really did mean to bring some twigs for you guys to look at, and I completely spaced out about bringing twigs. And you've got when you walk up, so down the bottom it shows you if you cut the branch straight, like at a 90-degree angle, it's fine. But if you cut it at an angle, you'll be able to see the interior of the twig a little bit better, so you can look at the pith. So the pith is the interior, and what does it look like? Is it solid? Is it chambered? Is it hollow? Does it have a star in the middle? Does it have a triangle? Is it circular? Here it talks about the diaphragm. So there's all kinds of things with the pith that you would want to look at, because some trees, trying to tell if it's a walnut versus a hickory. The pith is how you tell them apart. Then you have, when you go up these lenticels, these are sort of breathing spots on the tree. And so does it have lenticels or not? What the shape of them is like. Then you've got the leaf scars. So you can see they might be shaped differently. This one's kind of looks like the one on the right is a horseshoe shape, or a horse's face shape, versus this left one is more like a shield, the shape can tell you. Inside, you'll see inside those leaf scars, you might see little dots called bundle scars. Those are the scars of the veins that went from the tree branch into the leaf. And when the leaf fell off, those veins got capped off and it leaves a scar. So they can be characteristic in the shape and size and arrangement. They've got the buds, you've got axillary buds or lateral buds on the sides versus the terminal buds at the very tip. So there's all kinds of things. And right there, you know, if I said, give me 6 features about this twig, you would know, oh, what does the pith look like? Does it have lenticels? What's the shape of the leaf scar? You know, what does the terminal bud look like? Because you can see on this one on the right, the terminal bud is long and pointy compared to the tiny little lateral buds. They're different. So right there, you've got 6 things you can say about this, so that it'll be, when you go and try and identify, you'll have some of that information. And I don't think I'm going to go through identifying the trees, but it's the same kind of thing. This is showing you that this is an opposite leafed. So what are our 3 options for opposite? Maple, ash, and dogwoods. Okay, but the leaves are simple, which means that if you follow the edges never go back down to this terminal vein, or the middle vein. What's it called? Central vein. So you have your central vein going up, and as you follow the outline, those outline never reaches that central vein. The leaf surface is smooth, because if you're trying to identify between different species in this, you need to know that. And then the seeds, which maybe you have them or not, but they have wings. They're little samaros. And then it's got small red flowers in the spring. Now, you probably didn't need all those clues, did you, to say what this one was? Once I told you it was opposite, and you knew our 3 options, this is a maple. So, is it a red maple? Is it a silver maple? Is it a sugar maple? That's where you have to look at the leaf surface and the way that how many lobes this has. So this one was a red maple. So, and then here's one just to show you a compound leaf. Okay, so compound leaf, this is one leaf. And how do I know it's one leaf and not 7 leaves on one twig? How do I know that? Okay, the buds. So this goes back to the buds are starting to form is literally as soon as the leaves start growing, next year's buds start growing. So if I started at the very tippy top and I came down to where this joins the 2 other leaves, with leaves this size, you would have a bud. There's no bud there. Well, okay, I'll go down a little further. There's got to be one here. No buds here. Go down a little further. Still no buds. You get down here, and if this were still attached to the twig, you'd see a bud right there. So wherever the bud is, everything past, above, beyond the bud, is a leaf. So this is what's called a compound leaf, because if I follow the edges of this leaf, I hit the central vein. So this one is a compound leaf, but it's alternate. Remember what the compound opposite one was? The MADs. Well, we know it wasn't the the maples. The ashes are compound. So the ash leaf looks almost identical to this, but it would be oppositely arranged on the twig. And I don't show the twig here, so you can't see. But you can see that here's some other things. Does it have milky juice or not? So that's another thing. And then this one talks about the nuts. If you have the nuts, they split into 4 pieces. Every nut in this genus, the husk will split into 4.
Hickories.
And this is the hickory. This one happens to be the mocker nut hickory. So, yeah, so certain things, just looking at a few separate things, and true, you guys are probably like, how did I know that? Well, that's because you would have been marking through the book. These slides were designed to teach people how to use this book. So again, I figured I want to make sure we have time, because I have no idea. Yeah, 11:30. We're supposed to go to noon. I would definitely want us to get outside to see these trees and look at look at the amazing way that the library and the Friends of St. Clements, right? You guys help with doing this. Created a really vibrant outdoor space that has all these ecological benefits we talked about, like why plant trees. But it's also a space to go that you can read, you can just meditate, and I think it's a small size as well. So for a lot of people, it's very reminiscent of the size of yard that you might have, where you can kind of get a picture of how can I incorporate one tree into my yard. Well, they have all these nice little island spaces of one tree with things around it. So I think it's a really good example. So. Is everybody ready to go out? Yeah? Okay, I figured you were. And thank you again for watching this video. I'm Karen Molines, Natural Resources Division Chief for Calvert County Natural Resources and a board member of Maryland Native Plant Society. Please visit mdflora.org for additional information on native plants, ecosystems, and additional programs like this one. Thank you.